Autumn arrived early and was unusually harsh this year. The mornings grew colder, and Terrell had to bring out his old warm overalls and a thick knitted hat a month earlier than usual. "Everything's gone wrong in this world, even the weather," grumbled the elderly man, casting a disgruntled glance at the gloomy sky enveloped in low, dark clouds. Two huskies, dressed in luxurious grey and white coats, twirling and squealing happily in front of him. After watching the dogs for a while, the man looked up at the sky once more, as if hoping to disperse the clouds with his angry gaze, and went into the house. The old trusted hut, made of huge timbers, cracked by time, stood in a small clearing. On three sides the forest surrounded it, so close that the old sprawling limbs of the pines rested against the walls. From the shabby porch, a narrow path disappeared into the forest. The hut's owner took off his raincoat, hung it on a rack, and stopped in front of a small wash basin. The mirror above reflected a large head with long, uncut hair and a beard almost to the shoulders, almost completely grey. The large, sharp features of his face were handsome, with a special, rare, mature beauty that the few, deep chiselled wrinkles only emphasised. His eyes, under grey eyebrows that could use a little thinning, looked with the usual squint, attentive and tenacious. "Yes, what a handsome man I am," he chuckled ironically and turned around. "You're going to rot here alone among all this junk," the man muttered, looking around at the familiar room. The man had long considered himself an old man, though physically he could give a head start to men of 40 or even younger. For several years the surrounding villagers remembered the story of how the huntsman Terrell, alone, lifted a huge tree trunk that had fallen during a storm to free a man from under it. The 4 men who came to the rescue tried to repeat the feat, but only skinned their hands and tore their clothes. Of course, they didn't know how painful the torn muscles were afterward, how his back and shoulders whimpered from the strain, how his legs trembled after enduring a monstrous load, and how hard it was to pass by the astonished villagers without crying out in pain, without biting his lip, without giving away his condition. Why Terrell had to do that he probably didn't know himself, stubborn, unyielding, independent of birth. In neither childhood nor youth, nor mature years, and certainly not now, on the slope of years, had Terrell Lothrop ever confessed to anyone, even the smallest weakness, never complained, never asked for anything from anyone. No one who had known him all his life remembered this big, perpetually dishevelled head bowing to anything. On that autumn day, troubled by some premonition, Terrell wandered around the hut, began to fix the smoky furnace, but abandoned it. He got dressed, took his rifle, went out on the porch, and whistled to the dogs. The dogs, realising there was a walk to be had, squealed happily and rushed forward along the path, shoving and snapping at each other unkindly. "Where am I going?" grumbled Terrell, stepping habitually along the forest paths noticeable only to him. Suddenly the barking of dogs sounded far ahead. He knew perfectly well and caught the slightest nuances of their voices. He knew when they were raising and chasing a beast, when they were warning strangers, when they were preparing for an attack, and when they were just fooling around. Now the dogs had clearly detected something that shouldn't be in the forest, and were calling for him to sort it out. Terrell quickened his step and in a few minutes reached a small clearing where the dogs were hanging around. By a huge pine tree, with his back pressed firmly against it, as if trying to blend in with the trunk, stood a human. He squinted fearfully at the dogs and looked helplessly around the clearing. Terrell shouted at the dogs and came closer. Running his palm over his face, he wiped off the raindrops, blinked a few times, looked closely and whistled in surprise. Instead of a lost poacher or some village man who had suddenly decided to take a walk in the fall forest in the rain, there stood a child, a boy of about 11 to 12 years old, no older. With a strained eye, Terrell immediately determined the boy was a city boy. White, pale, untouched by tan skin even now, only a month after the hot summer, immediately gave him away as an apartment dweller. The boy looked badly. His jeans, torn at the knees in the strange youth fashion, were made for clinging to every bush, branch and snag. He had apparently fallen many times and was covered in mud. His light-coloured sneakers, covered with the same autumn greasy mud, were wet through. His light-coloured sneakers, covered with the same autumn greasy mud, were wet through and caused his owner agony. The boy looked at Terrell, approaching him with no less horror than at the dogs. Frankly speaking, huge, tall, overgrown with a thick beard, dressed in an old camouflage suit, with a hunting knife at his belt, Terrell could scare anyone. He looked more like a forest robber than a peaceful passerby. "Quiet, don't be scared of me." Terrell sensed the kid's fear, raised his hands. "Don't worry, it's all right. I'm the local huntsman, I'll help you." He tried to say something in reply, but only a hoarse whisper came from his throat. "Oh, you're freezing completely," said Terrell, anxiously grasping the boy's cold, wet hand. "Come on, quickly." For a while, the lad waddled alongside Terrell, but with every step he limped more and more. After a few minutes, the huntsman turned and easily picked up the boy in his arms. When he dragged the boy into his hut, dusk was falling. After helping him out of his wet clothes and shoes, Terrell seated him at the table. But the boy, utterly exhausted, began to slump over, so Terrell moved him to the bed. As soon as his head touched the warm, soft pillow, the boy fell into a deep sleep, undisturbed by worries or anxieties. Such is the gift of youth. "You've made a lot of mud," Terrell grumbled, picking up the boy's sneakers from the floor and removing the guest's light wet jacket from the rack. He shook the jacket lightly to rid it of moisture, and various items spilled from the shallow pockets. 2 keys, some coins, a flash drive, and a small paper rectangle wrapped in a cellophane bag. Terrell bent down, gathered everything and placed it on the table. Out of the corner of his eye, he noticed a photograph wrapped in the film. Something about it seemed unusually familiar and caught his attention. The photo showed a tall, broad-shouldered man and a young boy, slightly shorter than the man, but also sturdy. Both had thick, tousled hair and wide smiles. The older man had light-coloured eyes, while the boys were dark. Yet they shared a resemblance that made them kin, close to each other. Terrell's heart pounded frantically. Suddenly, images from the past, from his entire life, seemingly forgotten and buried deep in memory, flashed vividly before him. Nature had not deprived Terrell of either health or stature. From a young age he stood out among his peers, towering over them with his height, broad shoulders and booming voice. It was unwise to cross Terrell Lothrop, let alone anger him. He was quick to retaliate, but to his credit he was fair and forgiving. The one thing he absolutely could not tolerate or forgive was cruelty to animals. He was relentless toward tormentors or neglectful animal owners. While he personally taught his peers how to treat animals well, he devised unusual educational methods for adults. Terrell's ingenuity and skill knew no bounds. For instance, when the elderly grandmother Jennifer flogged her old goat, she later found her favourite shawl, knitted from the goat's wool, tied around the animal's neck. A stingy neighbour of the Lothrops who starved his dog once discovered his refrigerator empty, while dogs throughout the neighbourhood dragged pieces of frozen meat down the alleys in a daze. And the shopkeeper, who had abandoned his newborn kittens in the cold, found herself unable to leave her house in the morning because the door was sealed with a thick layer of snow. Terrell's antics were the talk of the village. Some laughed quietly, others openly expressed support for the tireless defender of animal rights. The truth-teller himself was often punished by his father for his exploits, but he seemed to view the punishments as a cost of his noble activities. That evening, 14-year-old Terrell was in no hurry to get home from training when he heard some sounds coming from an alley. Something was clearly going on. He turned the corner decisively. Under a lantern that cast a dim, uneven light stood a short figure with something small at her or his feet. A few steps away, 3 boys Terrell knew well were gathered. They were an inseparable trio of hooligans, 6th graders. He looked closely and suddenly realized that the solitary figure confronting the boy was a girl. The girl was short and thin, and beside the tall, strong boys, she seemed like a toddler. She had dark skin, black, thin braids sticking out from under a tied headscarf, and inexplicably, despite the fall mud, she wore house slippers on her feet. Above was something like a dress made of unusually bright fabric, and over it was a jacket that was clearly too small for her. Overall, she looked improper, entirely out of context. Terrell was initially quite surprised by this fact. He knew everyone in his settlement, both adults and kids. Then he realized she wasn't a local. She was a stranger. Many such people had recently arrived in the village. Terrell's parents said that they were refugees from some hot spot. What exactly a hot spot was, Terrell only vaguely understood, but it was evidently a bad place, as people with nothing but small bundles of rags and children had moved here and settled in long-abandoned houses on the village outskirts. "Hey you squint-eyed monkey! Don't you understand our language at all? That's my puppy! Do you hear me?" said one of the boys. The girl murmured something quietly, words Terrell couldn't catch. She suddenly bent down and picked up the little spotted puppy, who immediately licked her face. "What's there to talk about with her?" the second member of the group shouted. "We just need to take him away, that's all. Let's hurry before the glue dries, or the doggy won't stick. I'll shove that glue in you, you freak. No solvent will wash it off." Terrell promised in a quiet, grave voice. The effect exceeded all expectations. Caught off guard, the young hooligans tried to scatter, but instead collided with each other and fell, forming a pile of chaos on the ground. Suddenly, a clear, bell-like laugh rang out. It was the girl laughing. Terrell looked at her surprised. "Wow," he thought. "Just now she was almost trembling with fear, and suddenly she's laughing." The boys, having finally disentangled themselves, fled as fast as they could. Shouting a couple of affectionate and not-so-literary words after them, Terrell turned to the girl, who continued holding the puppy. "That's it, you don't need to be afraid anymore," he graciously assured her. "They won't come near you again." "Thank you," she said quietly, stretching the words slightly. "My name is Terrell," Terrell muttered. "What's your name?" "Sadie," the girl said quietly. They were sitting on an old log along the fence. The rescued puppy, the culprit of the incident, was merrily examining its surroundings. Terrell and his new acquaintance were talking passionately. The boy couldn't imagine talking so easily with a girl. Until now, peers, classmates, and neighbour girls were unremarkable creatures to him, with nothing to discuss. And suddenly beside him was a girl who was very interesting to him. Sadie's parents and others had fled to Terrell's country to escape bandits attacking their small village. She spoke of it reluctantly and quietly, as if listening for the sound of gunfire again. Terrell, of course, understood nothing about who shot, who was shot at, or why, but he realized how much Sadie had endured, terrible and deadly dangers that not every adult could survive. She suddenly seemed to him like a kitten, as small and defenseless as the animals he had rescued from human cruelty. "Well, let's go." He got down from the log and, to his own amusement, offered his hand to the girl. "Mum, Dad, this is Sadie," he declared from the threshold, looking into his astonished parents' eyes. "She needs to be fed, and Mum, do we have a jacket for her? Maybe we can get something from Jennifer. She's got more than she needs." "Yeah, right away," instantly responded his sister Jennifer, 3 years older, and not inferior in character and determination. "Take one of those. Apparently, kittens and puppies on the street have ended. Now our benefactor decided to help people." The mother laughed softly. Sadie started to go to school and often visited the Lothrop's house. Everyone was used to the quiet, thin, black-haired girl with dark velvet eyes and a white-toothed smile. With Jennifer, Terrell's sister, they became good friends, often playing pranks on Terrell, and it surprised no one when their childhood friendship grew into something more. Everyone saw that the tall, shouldering Terrell saw no one but the short, thin as a reed Sadie, and she looked only at her knight with love and admiration. "Oh, he's engaged, and don't sigh, it's useless," Jennifer declared, laughing at her friends who eyed her handsome brother. "Terrell is in love and needs no one but his beloved." Terrell finished school, went to the army, and Sadie waited, writing him letters. When the young man returned to his village, he marched past his parents' house and burst into the shabby house where Sadie's family lived. "That's it, Sadie, I can't go on without you. Pack up," he muttered, grabbing the bewildered girl and burying his face in her hair. The wedding of Terrell and Sadie was long remembered in the village. Sadie was unusually beautiful in her airy white dress. Terrell looked at her as if seeing her for the first time. The villagers put on their best clothes, guided by the rule that the brighter the better on holidays. Against this motley background, the bride looked like a porcelain statuette. Terrell admired her, adored her to the point of pain, wishing all the guests would leave him alone with his wonderful wife. "I'll go to the end of the world with you," she said without hesitation, the perfect words for that moment. Terrell was truly happy with his little princess, ready to carry her in his arms always, especially since his wife weighed no more than a child. After the army, Terrell brushed off all offers to continue his education and went to work in a huge forestry. "Dear," Sadie once said, placing a huge bowl of borscht in front of her husband, "you're not home often. I don't see you much." Terrell, listening to her, took a big bite of bread and replied, "Sadie, I have to work while they pay me. You and I need a big spacious house, because we'll have many children, 2 boys and 2 girls at least." "Are you crazy?" she laughed, playfully flicking him on the head. "But to have kids, well, at least one. You have to be home every once in a while." The man smiled, dropped the spoon, and grabbed his wife in his arms. Time passed. 3 years flew by unnoticed. Terrell and Sadie lived and worked, laughed, dreamed, and loved each other and the world around them. When Terrell was almost certain it was impossible to be more content with life, Sadie finally told him she was expecting a child. Throughout Sadie's pregnancy, Terrell was overly protective of her and the baby. Toward the end, he became so anxious that Sadie even began to get annoyed. "Stop it now, Terrell," she said with a teasing look. "You've worn yourself out and everyone around you. It's gotten to the point that your friends are asking about your health." She laughed. "Just imagine, not about my health, but yours, Terrell. Who's going to give birth, after all?" On the due date, Sadie, feeling contractions, was taken to the hospital. She lay on a gurney in the car, and Terrell sat beside her, holding her hand. Finally, she couldn't help but laugh. "Terrell, you're going to faint." At the hospital, Sadie looked at her husband seriously and said, "That's it. Wait for me. Or rather, wait for us." Pale and solemn, he sat in the waiting room thinking, "I'm so happy with her. So happy. And now I'll be even happier. How? It seems impossible." Twilight deepened outside the window, and minutes turned into hours. Terrell lost track of time, having forgotten his watch and phone in the chaos. Judging by his stiff back and legs, he had been waiting for a long time. Suddenly the door opened, and a man in a white coat entered the waiting room. The man had a troubled expression, avoiding Terrell's eyes, as if trying to muster the courage to speak. Finally, he looked Terrell in the eye. "Terrell," he said, breaking the silence. Suddenly, Terrell realized this stranger was about to shatter his world and his joyful expectations. Sadie was fragile, both inside and out. Perhaps her body couldn't withstand it, still weakened by a difficult, half-starved childhood, and the baby was too big for such a tiny mother. She died of internal bleeding, but managed to give birth, bringing their son into the world. "Terrell," the doctor said gently, touching Terrell's shoulder. "You must be strong. You have a son now, a fine, healthy boy. He stays with us for the allotted time. We'll watch him, and then you can take him home." A few days later, Terrell brought his son home. He was greeted by the whole village. The love story of Terrell Lothrop and the Sadie was, of course, well known to everyone. Her death and Terrell's sudden widowhood, with a little son in his arms, came as a shock to all. From birth, Dylan, as Terrell named his son, was like the child of the whole village. On the first day, the house was packed with so many people wanting to help the young father that the baby, overwhelmed by the fuss and fear, burst into deafening tears. "Okay, that's it. The official reception is over." Terrell's sister took charge of the situation. "We'll manage on our own somehow." Jennifer, who married early and already had 2 children, while, as she put it, her brother was fooling around, became a real lifesaver for Terrell. She taught the young father all the wisdom of infant care. "Don't shake, you," she grumbled at her brother as he tried to steady his trembling hands. The baby seemed so fragile and delicate that the man was afraid to hold her. "Take him like this," Jennifer showed him. "That's right. Hold him tight, but don't strain your arm so much, Terrell, or he'll fall off in 5 minutes." Terrell learned to feed his son, swaddle, dress him, and could walk for hours with the boy in his arms around the house singing lullabies. Though it was he who thought they were lullabies. Jennifer said his singing was more like the grunting of a bear, and only bear cubs could fall asleep to it. But despite his aunt's critique, Dylan listened to his father's voice with great pleasure and seemed very pleased with this musical accompaniment. The young father mastered bathing the baby and even learned to cut his nails, for which he received the highest praise from his sister. Only one thing Terrell never learned was to give his son medicine. At the first signs of illness, even the mildest, Terrell was so frightened he nearly fainted and was ready to take his son to the city over a simple runny nose. Jennifer told her acquaintances stories about her brother and nephew, enjoying their surprise. "And you know, Terrell is even better than most mothers. If he could, he would breastfeed his son, honestly," she would say with a lowered voice. However, Jennifer was worried about such desperate self-sacrifice. "Terrell, stop. Stop playing nanny. You need to work," she said once, and looking at her amazed brother laughed. "Because I have men from the forestry asking me every day, 'When will you come out of maternity leave?' It'll be all right." She stopped his protest as she walked. "Nothing is going to happen to your beloved Dylan. I'm still at home, and 3 kids are almost the same as 2. Jennifer finished with a laugh. So Terrell returned to work, happy to feel like a man again. And to tell the truth, they needed the money very much. But every evening he rushed home, missing his son terribly. He almost ran home to hear and see Dylan, to pick him up in his arms and twirl him around the room, feeling him grow heavier every day. Dylan grew up healthy, smart, and as tireless and inventive in mischief as his father and aunt were in their childhood. Each day he became more like his late mother. His father's sturdy build and his mother's lightness and flexibility were wonderfully combined in him. He resembled Terrell in his facial expression and his unruly curls, which could not be tamed and grew at an inconceivable rate. Yet it was Sadie's face, with slightly swarthy skin, very dark eyes framed by thick lashes, and a bright smile. And the expression on Dylan's face, calm, a little thoughtful, as if cautious, often painfully reminded his father of the one who had long left him. When Dylan was 10 years old, Terrell returned to the idea of building a house. "Sadie and I always dreamed of our own house, big and spacious," he said passionately to his sister, and rushed to realize his dream. He pursued it with all his passion, as he did everything in his life. Yes, the neighbours, impressed by the scale of the construction, said puzzled, "You're crazy, Lothrop." "Terrell, you're crazy, aren't you?" Jennifer said to her brother, clearly alarmed. "Why do you need such a big house? It feels like you're building a shopping centre. No other way." "A house should be big, for a big family," Terrell repeated like a mantra. "Like a stadium?" his sister snickered. "Who are you planning to live with there? The whole village?" "Well, you'll build it, and then what? Will you take turns living in one room or another? And who's going to clean all those windows for you? Will you hire a team of window cleaners?" "I'm not building for myself," Terrell answered confidently, ignoring Jennifer's jabs. "Dylan will grow up and have a big family. Do you understand? A big one, not like mine." "And what makes you think Dylan needs that? He'd want to live here." Jennifer wasn't about to go easy on her brother and posed a difficult question, but Terrell was unyielding. "My son will live here," he declared emphatically. "Of course he will ask you how, where he should live," Jennifer replied ironically, ending the pointless conversation. After 3 years, the house was mostly complete and quickly became a village landmark. It was 2-storied with large glazed loggias and wide windows, and a roof covered with red tiles. Among the other houses, Terrell's house looked like a peacock among the chickens. The man was bursting with pride and said to 13-year-old Dylan, "Here, Dylan, this is our house, our family nest. You know, in the old days, people lived in one house for generations, were born in it, died, left, but always returned, no matter what happened. That's what family is, you know? It's us and our home." Dylan nodded in agreement with his father, already planning how he could quickly escape the family nest to join his friends waiting near the shop. "Terrell, I've wanted to talk to you for a long time," Jennifer once said, listening to her brother's lecture on family values. "You keep telling Dylan about home, family and all that, but between you and me, the boy has never really had a family. Maybe you should think about it, huh? Don't play dumb. I mean, don't be a fool," she exclaimed, noticing her brother's bewildered expression. "You're a strong, handsome man in the prime of your life. You've always been popular with women, and now you're quite the catch. However, now we'll have to find a crazy woman to agree to clean this machine." Jennifer couldn't resist her favourite joke about the house. "But don't worry, I'll find you someone. You have plenty of admirers in the village." Jennifer looked at her brother and laughed at his frightened expression. "Terrell, well, seriously, are you planning to live like a bachelor forever? It's been 13 years since Sadie died." She suddenly sobbed, but quickly composed herself, angrily wiping her eyes and pushing her brother's shoulder. "Listen, Terrell, well, let's say you didn't want to bring a stepmother into Dylan's life. It's all right, but now what? You've raised Dylan. It's time to think about yourself." "I thought about it, Jennifer," Terrell said quietly. I can't, that's all. But I still need only Sadie, she and Dylan, and no one else." "Well, and you, sister," he said with a smile. "Of course," she laughed. "You need me for making pickles and jam and sewing holes in your jackets." Time passed quickly, each year faster than the last. Terrell, still lonely despite his sister's efforts to marry him off, lived with his son in his big new house. As Dylan's graduation approached, he became more restless. Terrell, returning from work, was surprised to see his son refusing his usual walks to the river with the dogs or hikes in the woods, which he had always loved. Dylan claimed he was studying for exams, sitting in his room on the 2nd floor. But most surprising and disturbing to Terrell was that his son began to shut his door tightly, as if isolating himself from his father, hiding something. Jennifer, Terrell's primary advisor in all life matters, shrugged. By then, she was already the mother of 2 adult sons, who had finished school and studied at technical college, and 2 charming girls, who she had managed to give birth to and raise without ceasing to care for her brother and nephew. "The boy is growing up in every sense," said Jennifer, looking at her brother meaningfully. "But he's never closed up before," Terrell said, confused. I've never entered his room without permission. Did you really think Dylan would sit on your lap all his life and tell you everything in your ear? That's it, Terrell. The boy has grown up. Get used to it. You're no longer the centre of his world." "Comforting," said Terrell thoughtfully. "You bet," Jennifer laughed. Dylan passed his high school exams, and Terrell still hesitated to talk to his son about plans. For some reason, he feared this conversation. It seemed to him he was bound to hear something from Dylan that he didn't want to hear. He kept postponing it, and then he vanished altogether when Dylan went into the army. For the first time, Terrell was left without his son. Loneliness weighed heavily on him. The evenings dragged unbearably long. The nights were filled with less cheerful memories instead of sleep, and the dawns brought no relief or rest. "You're fooling around." Jennifer, as always, categorically addressed her brother's condition. "Do something else besides work and your stupid house. Go with Lou to the forest, to hunt, or what?" she said, referring to her husband, a skinny, restless man who, despite 4 children and a tough woman, as he teased Jennifer sometimes, never lost his vivacity and cheerfulness. Hunting appealed to Terrell, not for shooting game, but for the joy of wandering through thickets and brushwood, or sitting in a secluded spot listening to the silence. The forest brought Terrell peace. His thoughts became light and pure, as if all the clutter had been washed away. The forest in their area was great. For many kilometers, the pines stood straight as arrows, like ship masts. He could walk for hours on the springy carpet of pine needles, inhaling the intoxicating scent of pine and mushrooms, touching the soft skin-like surface of the trunks where the bark had fallen off. "What kind of hunter is he?" Lou laughed when asked about their joint trips with Terrell. "He climbs up somewhere and sits there listening to the birds." News from Dylan rarely came, far less often than Terrell desired. Alive, healthy, serving, everything is normal. That was essentially the gist of it. Dylan clearly didn't spoil his father with lengthy messages or expressions of feelings. Terrell waited for his son, and as the end of Dylan's military service approached, his impatience grew. "Well, when are we expecting our soldier home? When do we prepare the dough for the pies?" Jennifer, busy in the kitchen, didn't look at her brother. "Terrell, when?" she asked again, not hearing an answer. "I don't know," came the reply. "Apparently not soon." "And what happened?" Jennifer put aside the frying pan she had been scrubbing and sat down next to Terrell. "Here." A small paper was visible in his hands. "He's arrived, but he's staying in town for now. He's going to study at the technical college." Confusion and resentment were evident in Terrell's voice, as if he were not a big grey-haired man in his 50s, but a little boy whose toy had been taken away. "Well, how so? I've been waiting for him." "Well, you waited, so what? We all waited. So we'll wait. And you'll wait. You're not going anywhere. And in general, Terrell," Jennifer got angry, "get a grip on yourself. The boy has grown up. He has his own life, interests and plans. And you're acting like an old hen. That's it. Your precious Dylan won't go anywhere. He'll study, get a profession, and come back." Jennifer, as always, found the right words for Terrell, and he calmed down. Finally, 4 years of Dylan's studies passed. During this time, he was home several times, arriving cheerful, healthy and noisy. He hugged his father, kissed his aunt and nieces, expressed how much he missed home and all his relatives, and then left again, with bags full of homemade goods. Last time, when his father tried to discuss the future, Dylan waved him off. "Oh, Dad, why talk about it now? I'll finish, I'll get my diploma, and we'll discuss it." Then he would look at his father and add, as if consoling him, "And you? Keep the house in order, or who knows, maybe I'll bring you new tenants." And he would wink mysteriously at his father. At last, Dylan received his diploma and announced his return home. The whole family, Terrell, Jennifer, and her family were eagerly awaiting their son, nephew, and cousin. Their impatience was particularly strong because he hadn't been home for months. Dylan arrived and everything seemed normal at first, but Terrell sensed something was amiss. His son was reserved, saying little, as if deliberately keeping himself tense. Then, seemingly realizing this, Dylan began to laugh and joke, but it felt forced. Whenever he met his father's gaze, he'd fall silent. Jennifer also felt this inexplicable tension, which sat with them at the table like an uninvited guest. After an hour, she abruptly stood up. "Well, why are we still sitting?" "We're going home. Come on, Lou, get up," she urged her husband. "Girls, let's go. Paul, where's your brother? Did he get lost in your uncle's mansion? Let's go home, everyone. Dylan needs to rest from his journey." Hurrying her large family along, Jennifer ushered them all out. She then returned to her brother, kissed him on the cheek, and whispered faintly, "Good luck, and please stay calm." She patted Terrell's shoulder encouragingly, intercepted Lou as he tried to return to the festive table, and closed the door behind all of them. Terrell and Dylan were left alone. They had always gotten along well, even in silence, with a sense of understanding and trust, but now Terrell realized with anxiety and surprise that it was difficult to be near his son. Waves of tension seemed to emanate from Dylan, who was clearly struggling with a serious decision. His father suddenly felt that the young man sitting opposite him, once so dear and beloved, had become a stranger. "Well, son," Terrell cleared his throat, "let's drink to your homecoming." Dylan twirled the shot glass in his hands and set it on the table. "You drink, I don't want to," he said, looking at his father in the face. "Well, I'm not particularly eager either," Terrell replied, looking embarrassed and blushing. "It's just tradition to drink to homecoming. We've been waiting for you so long. I even hoped you might not come alone." He cleared his throat awkwardly. "Maybe you'd have a girl, you know, your bride?" Terrell's voice trailed off, but Dylan continued to stare at his father, not helping him out of the uncomfortable situation. "Well, here we are, waiting for you," Terrell repeated. "I have already spoken with my boss at the forestry. A good place in the office has already been reserved for you. But I'll tell you, even without my boss's help, there's plenty of work." "Dylan, why did you come without your things?" "Are you going to take them later?" "Let's just say I'm here for my things right now," Dylan said at last, as if he had finally made up his mind. "Father," he said, using a word he had never addressed Terrell with before, and then, as if sensing his rudeness, smiled apologetically. "Dad, let's talk seriously, okay, and try to listen calmly. I'm not coming back here," he stated. "What do you mean?" Terrell asked, his voice muffled. "Wait, I don't understand what you're saying." "I'm not going to come back here," Dylan repeated, enunciating each word clearly. "I'm not coming back at all. Never." A heavy silence fell over the house, broken only by the ticking of the large old clock on the wall. "Wait, I don't understand. I can't think straight. So you didn't come home? Did you just come to tell me you're never coming back? Is that it?" "Well, pretty much, yes," Dylan confirmed. Terrell looked at his son confused, then inexplicably grabbed a glass filled with whiskey from the table and downed it in one gulp. "You want to abandon the place where you were born, where you grew up, where you were loved, where your grandparents and your mother are buried?" Dylan suddenly objected, as if defending himself. "Stop it, Dad. Why are you acting like an old stump? That's nonsense. Ancestral graves, dear home. What's next? Reminiscing about the apple trees under the window? What kind of talk is that? It's the 21st century, don't you realize? All the opportunities are in the city. All normal, smart people succeed only there. Here, in our backwoods, you can only count cockroaches and get stupid among the local bumpkins." As Dylan continued his tirade, Terrell looked at his son attentively, as if seeing him for the first time. "I take it you don't want this house either?" Terrell smirked as soon as his son paused his heated monologue to catch his breath. How can it be, Dylan? Didn't we dream together of having a family home? No, Father, I need the house, Dylan suddenly declared. I don't understand. Terrell ran his hand over his eyes tiredly. You're not going to live here, but you still need the house? What's not to understand? Why do I have to explain everything to you like a child? I want to sell the house. I need money, Father. Money. I've already found a buyer. They're offering a good price. If everything is settled quickly, then... Dylan trailed off, meeting Terrell's gaze. Ah, so that's why you're here. To sell the house. You need money, then. Now I see. Terrell smirked, outwardly calm but inwardly shaking. Tell me, son, if it weren't for the house, would you have come here again? And besides, where would you offer me to live? Should I go to your aunt's house? Why go to my aunt? There's always a solution. After all, are you really going to stay here all your life? You could go to the city too. There's a lot of demand for drivers of your caliber there, by the way. And for living? Well, you could rent an apartment. Dylan spoke, trying to sound confident and convincing, but he seemed to realize the absurdity of what he was suggesting to his father. Finally, he fell silent. So I sell the house, give all the money to you, and move to the city in my old age. Me? To the city? He said it as if he were listening to these wild words for the first time. And settle down somewhere. Well, something will be found. And you'll help me, son, right? You won't leave a dumb old country bumpkin in the city alone, will you? Terrell smiled ironically, and Dylan turned white. Well, then sit in your clan nest like an owl, Dylan shouted. It was you who dreamed, not me. I've been dreaming of something else for a long time. All my dreams are out there, do you hear? And I need money for those dreams. Father, did you really think I'd come back to this backwater? What would I do here? Fell trees all my life? I'm ashamed to even bring my wife. Yes, my wife. Dylan noticed his father's astonished look, stretched his lips in a smile and nodded. Imagine, I got married and didn't tell you anything, because I didn't need all this village nonsense at my wedding, you know. My cousins and sisters in their best village outfits. My dear Uncle Lou, who'd get drunk in half an hour and start telling stories of how I ran around pantless as a child. And my favourite aunt, with her peasant antics, and your dear boss from forestry. Do you understand? I don't need any of that. Dylan's excited speech was cut short as his father suddenly stood up, quickly moved toward his son, and slapped him hard. From the blow, Dylan's head jerked back, and his cheek began to redden rapidly. Your aunt may have peasant antics, the father said in a quiet but somehow very scary voice. But she raised you like her own child after your mother died. If it hadn't been for her, I couldn't have handled you. Go away, Terrell said in a muffled voice. The door had long since closed behind Dylan, and Terrell sat at the table, unable to take his eyes off the pattern on the tablecloth. Over and over again, he traced the outline of a large red flower with numerous curls. Somehow it seemed to him that if he lifted his eyes from that stupid ornament, what had happened and what had been said, which seemed to hang in the air, would simply collapse on him and crush him with its own weight. How much time had passed since his son had left, Terrell did not know. The room was gradually getting darker, twilight creeping in from the windows. Are you still sitting here? Came a sudden sound in the silence. He looked up and didn't immediately recognize his sister. He had to concentrate hard to do so. Jennifer, he's gone completely, Terrell said. He doesn't need anything here, do you understand? Nothing. And he doesn't need us, even me. He only came to tell you that? She somehow didn't look particularly surprised. Terrell nodded uncertainly. He realized that nothing and no one would make him admit to his sister that Dylan had come for the money. and it didn't seem important to him right now. "Jennifer, my dear, how can it be?" Terrell looked at his sister confusedly. "I was ready to give him everything. Everything. Do you understand? But why did he say that? About me, about all of us?" Terrell did not want to repeat the words that Dylan had thrown about his aunt and her family, about all the people who had surrounded and loved him from birth. Jennifer sat down next to her brother and sighed deeply, in a special way, as women who had been through a lot, but who kept their souls warm and generous could do. From this light sigh, it becomes lighter, as if you are a baby again, and next to Mum, all troubles become small and insignificant, like a scratch on your knees. She hugged her brother, pressed his weary head against her, and shook him gently. "Oh, Terrell, Terrell," she murmured faintly. "You put all of yourself into your boy. You left nothing for yourself. Not a single drop." A few days later, Terrell came to the forestry department and met his boss. After an exchange of greetings, he asked, "Listen, you seemed to be looking for a gamekeeper in the reserve. Did you find one?" "What are you talking about, Terrell? Where can you find one? No one wants it because the salary there isn't high, and you have to sit in the forest for 11 months of the year out of 12. Who needs it? And it's not a good idea to send a stranger there. Our woods and thickets are like a hell of a place. And the territory is huge. Anyway, we need a local who knows everything there." It's useless." The boss waved his hand. "Why do you ask? Do you have someone?" "Yes, me." Terrell looked at the man confidently. "I know our forest. Well, you know, I understand it will probably be necessary to study to get certifications. I'm ready. Tell me where and how." "Terrell, are you serious?" "There was an old hut there. Hasn't it been torn down yet?" Terrell interrupted. "No, it's still standing." "Where can it go? Since the former gamekeeper died, it still stands untouched." "It must have fallen apart after so many years. After all, no one has lived there for 5 years." "Well, it's no big deal. My hands grow from the right place. I'll fix it. Let's decide how and what to do. And give me the materials to repair the hut. Don't be stingy." A few more days passed. "Are you selling the house?" Jennifer barked from the doorstep. "Well, I am." Terrell looked at his sister from under his brows. "What the hell do I need it for now? This house. It's a lot of trouble, beyond measure. I'm living here like a fool on 2 floors, and I keep thinking I should get a maid and a majordomo so that I don't have to wear out my own hands." "Terrell, I'm talking to you seriously. Drop your stupid jokes and explain everything properly." "It's necessary, Jennifer. You understand? It's necessary. Dylan has a family there," he repeated diligently, not noticing his sister's surprised look. "He probably already has a child. Well, if that happens, he shouldn't have to live there in rented corners and work hard with those damned loans while I'm sitting here in 10 rooms alone. He hurt you, Terrell. He hurt you terribly." "Well," Terrell fell silent and added bitterly, "I'm not the first, nor the last, who had a son who wasn't what I wanted. And maybe I'm the one who's not right. Perhaps I expected something wrong. Did something wrong. Who knows, Jennifer? Who knows?" He sighed heavily. "I don't need the house anymore, and I don't need this money either." "All right," Jennifer continued to look worriedly at her brother. "You'll sell the house, give the money to Dylan. But what about you? Where will you go in your old age? I'd like to know." "Oh, don't worry about that. I've already rented myself a superb place in an eco-friendly suburban neighborhood. Beautiful views from the windows. State-provided board, quiet and very intelligent neighbors. Mostly furry." Jennifer, realizing that her brother's jokes hid confusion and pain, remained patiently silent. "Jennifer, forgive me." Terrell finally became embarrassed. I've gotten carried away, but don't worry about me. Everything is going very well. Really? I'll live in our reserve. I'll be a gamekeeper. I'm getting the paperwork done right now." "I see," Jennifer said slowly. "So you've decided to run away from everyone, to bury yourself in the forest. Is that it?" "Come on, Jennifer," Terrell waved his hand. "It's not as if I'm going to the North Pole. It's only 10 kilometers from here. And as for running away, you can't run away from yourself," he finished bitterly. Many years passed. Terrell continued to work as a gamekeeper. He was responsible for a vast territory overgrown with pine forests. It was plenty of work. Every day he patrolled a large portion of his lands, observing the animals, clearing forest debris, arranging feeders for hungry winters, and monitoring animal extraction during hunting season. A particular headache for Terrell, like any gamekeeper, was poachers. They tried to bribe him, placate him, even intimidate him. However, after he had beaten up 3 burly guys armed to the teeth and marched them on foot to the police station, fewer and fewer people in the neighborhood wanted to tangle with Terrell. Dogs became his helpers. In the loyalty of his 4-legged friends, Terrell found true solace. He adored dogs. His huskies were exemplars of beauty, health and training. On the small area in front of the gamekeeper's hut, there were always 2 or 3 silver-grey beauties. There Terrell lived, year after year, becoming a true forest hermit, having buried his pain and loneliness, along with himself, in the forest wilds. And so it remained, until the day he accidentally stumbled upon a lost boy. Terrell thoughtfully looked at the photograph that had fallen out of the pocket of the unexpected guest found in the forest. That picture showed him and his son Dylan. It was the day Dylan had graduated from high school. Terrell shifted his gaze to his reflection in the mirror. From there, he saw an aging man with lush beard that fully covered the lower half of his face. The man sighed, and for the first time in many months, pulled out a razor. The simple procedure changed him beyond recognition. He was himself again, and immediately looked 20 years younger. Terrell took the photo lying on the table and looked at it again. Now he resembled the man in the picture. And suddenly he noticed that the boy on the bed was staring at him with wide eyes. "Is your name Terrell Lothrop?" he whispered. Terrell at last took a good look at his find. The boy was very thin, pale, with large dark eyes. Terrell was quite sure that he had never seen, could not have seen this child before, but just as surely he felt that he knew him from somewhere. Something subtly familiar was in his face, something terribly familiar, stirring a sweet pain in his heart. "Who are you, boy?" he asked quietly, seating himself in a chair and not taking his eyes off the boy's face. "I am Matthew," said the latter, "and my surname is the same as yours, Lothrop," he added, almost in a whisper. "So you're Dylan's son?" Terrell said, his voice almost calm. "Yes, I'm Matthew Lothrop, your grandson." Matthew was born shortly before Dylan had broken ties with his father and moved to the city. Dylan's family life was far from happy. For years he and his wife stayed together, perhaps only because of the apartment bought with the unexpected money from his father. When Dylan received this substantial sum, his first impulse was to reconcile with his father. "You'll have time," his wife declared when he told her about it. "He probably said nasty things to you too, so let him come to you to make amends." However, Dylan tried to contact his father, but was informed that Terrell no longer lived in the village. Months turned into years, and Dylan always thought he could wait, finish urgent matters, and then go fix everything. Matthew grew up amid endless quarrels between his parents. Lonely and feeling unwanted, he was convinced he was alone in the world, except for his self-absorbed parents, always busy with their grievances against each other. Then one day he saw a picture of his young father, embraced by a tall, handsome, slightly grey-haired man. "That's your grandfather," his mother replied grumpily to his question. "A rustic fool, and your father's the same. He should have stayed in his village, then I might have a normal life." The usual complaints about fate and Dylan followed, but Matthew no longer heard them. He has a grandfather, and he lives nearby, just 10 kilometres from the city. That same evening, he tried to ask his slightly drunk father about his grandfather. Dylan was embarrassed. Talking about his father always stirred a burning mixture of anxiety, shame, and longing. To hide it, he said, "Forget about him. He hasn't thought of me once in all these years. I'm probably guilty too, but he should have also—" Dylan fumbled for words, ran his hand over his wet eyes, and added angrily, "He was always as stubborn as a mule." "Just like you," his wife habitually fueled the quarrel. "Don't you dare speak bad of my father," Dylan blustered. "You're living in his apartment, by the way." Matthew, having endured another fight between his parents, couldn't take it anymore and ran away from home. He had some birthday money saved up. After reaching the right village by bus, the boy timidly asked the first person he met where he could find Terrell Lothrop. The man looked indifferently at the boy and waved his hand toward the forest. Matthew wandered through the woods for a long time, drenched and frozen, his head clouding from hunger and fatigue. Then a tall, broad-shouldered, bearded man emerged from the forest and took him in his arms. For some reason, Matthew immediately felt at ease and calm. In the morning, instead of the bearded man, his grandfather sat in the chair, exactly as Matthew had imagined him in his dreams. Terrell sat next to his grandson and held him close, his arm around the boy's narrow, skinny shoulders. The old gamekeeper's heart beat smoothly and joyfully. Everything was back to normal. He had someone to live for again.